Cool. All right, let's get started. We are live, and so hello and welcome everybody to today's webinar, How Voice Can Deepen User Engagement and Future-Proof Your Product. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be on the World Wide Web. I want to thank you for taking the time to attend this session that we've got going on here. Quick note before we begin, this webinar will be recorded and the recording will be made available to you via email after the live event. You'll see that we also encourage you to ask questions using the Q&A button in the Zoom webinar window. And so throughout a conversation, throughout a discussion, feel free to ask questions as they pop up or emerge in your brain. And then I'll try to weave them into the conversation as it makes sense. A little bit about myself. My name is Tony Wan. I am the managing editor at EdSearch. I oversee a lot of the content, the news and the reports that you'll see on our website. And a lot of what we do here at EdSearch is to facilitate conversations among thought leaders around some of the interesting work that they're doing in the education technology space. Now, I also want to thank our panelists for joining us today. Today, we're joined by a trio of industry experts who are doing various things to leverage voice technology into their companies and their products. First up, we've got Andrew Smith-Lewis. He is the co-founder and CEO of Cerego. Andrew founded Cerego to create an open platform to improve memory and quantify knowledge. And his passion for this research stretches back to his high school days and at Bronx Science, and which inspired him to start 3 education and technology companies in Tokyo, where he's lived for nearly 25 years. Andrew, today you're beaming in from San Francisco nearby. Next up, we've got Melissa Lobo. She is the Vice President of Platform and Partnerships for Instructure. Melissa focuses on creating a technical infrastructure for all of Instructure's solutions that fosters robust learning ecosystems for their clients. She spent 2 decades in the education technology world, working for a number of technology suppliers and educational institutions, as well as teaching leadership courses that are focused on managing technology for educational change. And last and not least, we've got Borzo Motlagh. He is the enterprise architect for Frontline Education. Bo, as he called short term, is in short form, is the enterprise architect for Frontline Education, which is a leading provider of human capital, business, and special ed management solutions for K-12 schools and districts. He's the only enterprise architect for the company, and so he's proposed Frontline's enterprise level strategy and oversees the development and growth of the Frontline Insights platform. And additionally, he served as a technology strategy lead through Frontline's unicorn acquisition by Thoma Bravo. So that is a brief introduction of who will be sharing their thoughts for our conversation today, which is about voice technology. Today, voice technology is more effective than ever before, and it's cropping up in more places, including in education. It promises students, instructors, and administrators easy and delightful ways to interact with digital curriculum and instructional tools. And we're seeing more and more edtech companies that are coming up these days to leverage voice to deepen user engagement and to add new product capabilities, leveraging these new technology. One fun fact, 1 in 2 smartphone users now use voice technology, and half of all users expect to increase their voice technology usage, which shows that this trend will continue to grow. You know, it's a fun anecdote. I was recently in New York visiting my cousin who recently had a baby. And it was just very, you know, I don't think of myself as an old person, but it was really interesting to see my cousin's 18-month-old baby start talking and speaking to the Alexa device in their home. And, you know, kind of made me feel like, or think about for the first time, oh my God, what are these kids doing? It made me feel a little bit like an adult. Perhaps that's probably what my parents might have felt when the internet first came into our personal computer and lives. So, as with all new emerging technologies, there raises a lot of fascinating possibilities and also questions around how we leverage them for good. So fellow panelists, I'd like to begin a discussion by just asking each of you a brief question around how your respective company is leveraging voice technology to support your work. So let's start with you, Andrew. Tell us a little bit about Cerego and how you're leveraging voice technology to support your mission to improve memory and knowledge.
Sure. So Cerego, thanks for the introduction, and it's great to be here. Cerego is about the concept of essentially making people smarter by combining some narrow AI and some cognitive science. And our mission is to be able to measure and improve human potential. So what we want to be able to do, agnostic to the content, agnostic to where learning happens, we want to be able to improve outcomes demonstrably for individuals and gather a lot of really interesting and important data about their learning journey and be able to predict their future performance based on that data. So we work across K-12, higher ed, corporate government, serve a variety of really interesting clients that are looking to improve everything from outcomes in biology courses to train people on battlefields to improve ROI for corporate learners. Voice for us is a new area. I think that voice is really just a natural extension of the intelligence on the platform. So we're a cloud-based platform, web and mobile, and a natural intelligence, natural extension of that is to meet users where they are. So we are prototyping and designing some partners that are for learners, but also for instructors to give them more actionable insights about how students are performing.
Great, thank you, Andrew. And as a reporter, I often like to see things in action. And so I understand that you've got a brief demo presentation to just kind of give us a look in a sense of how Cerego is tapping into voice technology, right?
Sure, I will attempt this live demo across a webinar. We all know that these devices are slightly temperamental. I'm going to hold up my Echo Show because this particular demo takes advantage of the screen. And the use case here is really for an instructor. We modeled this off some work we're doing with one of our partners, Arizona State University. And the idea of the skill is to, if we could lower the friction for instructors to get access to data, we can drive better outcomes. We see this on our own platform. And we think if you could be home at night and ask Alexa about your class, you could get, you could lower the friction and get better outcomes. So I will attempt to demo this live skill on this webinar. Alexa, launch Cerego Learning.
Okay, I've successfully connected to your Cerego account.
How's my astronomy class doing?
Your AST-111 has 90 students on track and 10 who are falling behind. Would you like me to nudge those 10?
That's a good idea.
Okay, I've sent push notifications to those students who are off track.
When do my students study?
Your students are most active on Friday mornings, between 9 a.m. and noon.
When should my students study?
Individual times vary, but overall your students are more efficient in the evening between 9 p.m. and midnight.
Is there anything I should cover in class tomorrow?
Some students are struggling with the concept of galaxy clusters and superclusters. You may want to cover these items in person.
Can you remind me about superclusters?
From your content, a supercluster is a large group of smaller galaxy clusters or galaxy groups. It is among the largest known structures of the cosmos.
Goodbye.
Wow.
Exiting Cerego now. See you at your next scheduled review.
Phew. Okay. Yeah.
That worked. Wow. Have you ever done a demo through a webinar before?
This is a first.
Oh,
a
nice.
Global first. I'm very excited.
Always love to break ground. And,
thank you.
great. As it turns out, as a writer, I am also most optimal and effective between the hours of 9 p.m. and midnight.
There you go. There you go.
Students. All right. Next up, we got Melissa. So Melissa, Instructure is best known for its learning platforms Canvas and Bridge. Can you tell us a little bit more about how your teams are tapping into voice technology and what it brings to your offerings?
Sure, and yes, thank you also for having me here today. So as you mentioned, we're best known for our learning management systems, and the focus particularly in Canvas for our educators leveraging Canvas is to help them find easy and very intuitive ways to engage their students as they're using our platform. So a little over a year ago, we launched a set of Alexa skills so that those institutions that are leveraging voice technology within their either classrooms or learning environments or in the dorms or just in the overall learning experience that are encouraging their students to leverage could also leverage voice within Canvas. Those skills do things like help students get their grades, identify missing assignments, identify to-dos. So a student might ask, you know, Alexa, do I have any missing assignments? Or Alexa, what are my grades? Or Alexa, what do I need to do today? And we launched that over a year ago and saw some really awesome uptake in leveraging those initial skills that we introduced out to the market. Most recently, we've launched we've open sourced, I should say, those skills and our technology behind those skills. So we're hoping that our broader education community will also go build skills. It's an easy thing to do. AWS provides really great resources to do that. And we're hoping that our community will build more skills so that we can have a larger range of voice opportunities for our users of Canvas.
Great. Thank you, Melissa. And Bo, Frontline Education, as I understand it, has a wide suite of tools that support the administrative operations and human resource management for K-12 schools and districts. Tell us a little bit about what voice technology, how it supports what you're trying to do for your customers and clients.
Absolutely, and yeah, that's absolutely right. Thank you as well for including me. This is very exciting. So yeah, Frontline Education supports something like administrators and educators in about 14,000 school districts across the country right now, with a wide array of tools targeting, as you said, HCM, ERP, and SIS. And for us, it's been an interesting experience because we have a natural evolution of these different tools and interfaces that are moving forward. We gather quite a lot of data for everything from how educators put in absences, when they do that, through the management of those resources, through professional development time associated to it. On the district and all the way through just about every aspect of these human capital management type things that you can think of. And as we collect this data, we provide different insights and different representations of that data so that districts can make good decisions. And for us, the voice aspect of this is a pretty natural evolution as we move forward, in that we have a mobile experience that explains some of this as well. And as we began to play with what would voice look like, we began to understand that this could really provide a lot of interesting insights and data very quickly for people, but also begin to make it easier just to interact with frontline systems and the variety of tooling that we provide, creating these little slices that people can interact with very quickly to get what they need and just have an easier interface to the system in general. So that's been the goal and something that we've been pushing forward with. And we've been working with prototyping some of these skills, and we've dedicated a lot of manpower to start pulling something together that we can make available on a wider audience with our school districts as well, and just make it available as part of our platform moving forward.
Great, Bo. And as I understand it, you've also got something to show off. Just give us a sampling of what it looks like for one of your products, right?
Yep, let's give this a go. Another live demo. I was very impressed with Andrew. Let's see if I can pull off the same thing here. So I'm going to transfer us to speakerphone real quick, and I am not doing a show. This is a simple Amazon Echo, which is something that we like the simplicity in that, with the show and with the others, you certainly have the ability to provide that visual feedback, but we can also, for, I think it's like $30, you can have this experience on your desk as well. So let me see if I can do this for you guys. Alexa, tell Frontline Education, talk data to me.
You have 8 total absences recorded today, with 8 of them unfilled. 9 of the absences today were due to professional growth activities. Yesterday there were 3. As of yesterday, you have 12 open positions. There are 5 applicants for these positions. 17 of the open positions have no applications yet. Log into your Frontline account for more details.
Nice.
I think that worked. And so we in this particular in this particular example, where you can imagine the use case being an administrator at work coming in and just trying to get a quick snapshot of what's going on with their district that day. We also have other more educator-oriented skills that we're working with. So, for example, we were at the edtech conference a few weeks ago, and we demonstrated how a teacher could put in an absence if they're not feeling well one day directly with the Echo device or the Alexa device. These are some of the use cases that we're targeting.
Mm-hmm. Great. It seems like some of our audiences already have some questions. A couple of them have been answered. I think Jack asked in the chat box, where do we find open source instructor Alexa skills? And Melissa responded that you can find that in your GitHub. Is that correct, Melissa?
Yes, that's correct. All of the resources are there. And we encourage people to not only take a look at that and leverage it, but then also share skills back with us, and we'd be happy to evaluate those and potentially add those to our collection of skills through our own resources.
Great. And then we have an open question from Zach. Another question from Melissa. How much adoption or usage have you seen with voice over the past year?
Yeah, so over the past year, we don't have precise numbers around the adoption, but we have seen some very large institutions adopt the use of voice and actually look to create more opportunities for us to extend the type of skills that we have for Canvas, particularly in the teacher and administrator area. I should clarify, we have skills for students, teachers, administrators, as well as parents, depending on the audience that's leveraging Canvas. So we don't have precise numbers, but we have some very large institutions using it, and we think it's somewhere around 25-ish% of our customers in some sort of meaningful way. And we have over 3,000 customers. We're hoping to get more adoption, and we probably have a bunch of anecdotal adoption we're just not as aware of yet.
Right. I want to kind of turn the conversation now to kind of talking a little bit about what it takes to kind of add voice technology into your product. Or maybe even stepping a little bit before that, when did you really decide that this was something that was worth the time and investment? As I understand it, Frontline, Cerego, and Instructure, you've been around, for about more than a decade or so. And I imagine that when the company started, these kind of capabilities, voice capabilities, were not, maybe well refined enough to build off of then. But so there's an open question to all of our panelists. Just tell us a little bit about when and why your company started thinking about adopting voice technology, and why did you think that it was worth the investment?
I can jump in, go first here. It's a good opportunity for me to give a quick shout out to the people whose brainchild this was at Frontline. So the actual idea for Alexa really just there were two individuals at Frontline. I'll just throw their names in because they're probably listening. Nick Pomo and Sean Anster. And they were the ones that really decided to look at our infrastructure, and they were interested in Alexa. A bunch of us had Alexa devices, and we like to talk about the gadgets and talk about what we're into. And they both independently kind of had created a POC at Frontline. One was more around the administrative data, and the other was more around the absence creation, so more of a consumer-facing kind of idea. It was their effort that really took it off.
Around what year?
This was very recent.
Started?
Yeah, this was very recently. This was just in the last, I guess, 8 months ago or something like that is when all of this started happening for us. Mm-hmm. And that effort very quickly was demonstrated to senior leadership, and it just immediately sparked interest as to, hey, this is something that we should do. And from there, we ended up having conversations with AWS, who was really interested in the idea of tapping into all of the data that Frontline really does possess and creating functionality through the Alexa device that way. And so we went very rapidly from that to prototype to demonstrating these skills at a conference, and then immediately realizing this is a thing that's important and going to be useful, and dedicating time to that so that we could push it forward to our districts and our user base.
Andrew?
Sure. So We started playing, one of our engineers started prototyping with Alexa very early on, over two years ago, and picked Alexa simply because the environment was open and it was easy to develop skills. And our initial thought was that it could be really interesting as a medium for engagement with learners. And then sort of about 6 months ago, one of our lead engineers said, hey, I have a slightly different idea, which is maybe we should use this for instructors. And that was based upon our science group saying that they saw from the data that instructors that were more engaged in actually going into our web and mobile applications and looking at outcomes data for learners, there was a high correlation with better performance from those students. And so we thought if we could lower the friction for instructors getting access, that would, could possibly lead to better outcomes. And we also thought that in some ways voice is great, but if you think about depending on what the content is, it's much faster and easier to go through it on your mobile phone than it is to go through it on Alexa. Although obviously for certain types of things, perhaps language learning, Alexa would be brilliant. So we felt it was a really good fit to start to look at this for instructors and for educators. And about 6 months ago, prototype this went to our partners at ASU and said, hey, we've got an interesting idea. They also saw similarities in terms of their own data. They know from their data sets that more involved instructors lead to better outcomes for learners. So it was just sort of a natural fit to work with them on this.
Mm-hmm. And Andrew, I think there's a quick question, another question from our audience members just asking, for Cerego, how soon will the product be in teachers' hands at ASU?
Yeah, we've got some instructors that are working with us right now on this, and it'll be open to a larger population in the first quarter of next year.
Great. Mm-hmm. Melissa, tell us a little bit about instructors kind of thinking and how your team made the decision to invest in voice.
Sure. So oh gosh, a little over a year ago, so probably about 16 months ago, we were digging into some research and looking at some of the new innovative approaches institutions were taking to support their student base, and we ran across a couple of really exciting examples of voice just in general to support the student experience, and pass that along to some of our engineers, and it turned into a Hack Week project for us. So we do Hack Week twice a year with our engineers, and we had a single engineer. We also picked Alexa because of how easy and accessible and open the skill development process is, and he put together some cool ideas, put a couple skills together, and then shortly thereafter we launched that at our annual conference. And we were super excited. We thought we wanted to get a sense of, okay, we know we'll have some customers leveraging this, but how excited is our broader audience? And in our annual conferences, we usually get around 2,500 attendees, mostly instructors, instructional designers, directors of technology, those folks. And we got a huge group that came to us and said, not only do we love what you've done, do more. And then we continued to build on those skills shortly thereafter. Once again, it was a fairly straightforward process for us, a fairly easy process, given the nature of Canvas and the kind of data that we collect. It made it easy to create a good, robust collection of skills for differing users that they could leverage right away. So we did that over the last, like I said, 16 months ago. And then most recently, also as a Hack Week project, we decided, as I mentioned before, to open source it. So it's continued to be work that we've done that's tied to our roadmap, but that's been very easy for us to do and experiment with and follow along with what our customers are looking for because of sort of how simple it is to get going with enabling voice technologies.
Great. So as you said, the whole thing kind of originated from a hackathon.
A Hack Week, yep.
Put together a half-week hackathon. And that kind of leads into my next question. We have a good number of entrepreneurs, people from the industry, from companies watching today, and they may be wondering, is there any specific kind of expertise in terms of engineering skills that you need to be able to start adding voice technology to your company? Do you need to hire a special kind of software engineer, or is it pretty quick and standard thing for that most software engineers should be able to develop and build for? Tell us a little bit about does it require kind of a special expertise, Sarah, in your product development department to make this happen?
I can jump in and sort of answer that in conjunction with what I just shared. No, it didn't for us. In fact, it was a very easy thing for us to get going. It really required somebody interested in understanding voice technologies and understanding more of the application of it, as opposed to the actual development of those. The other thing that was important is because we have an open data foundation and it's fairly easy to get at our data through our APIs, we already had a lot of the work done because it was easy for us to connect that skill with direct data points in Canvas. I think if you don't have that to start, you probably need someone that will be able to understand how to develop those APIs or how to access that data in a meaningful way so that the skills can leverage it. But for us, we were set up for success. And then once again, it's pretty easy to put this together, and our engineers had a good time doing it because it was a fun, new, innovative thing to dig into.
I would add, I absolutely agree with Melissa there. I think if you have an infrastructure that's designed for this sort of data exchange with an API, something robust enough that allows these sort of integrations, it can be very easy to stand up Alexa, and that's been our experience as well. I think AWS has done a really great job at making that a very simple interface to work with and to begin developing, and most seasoned developers should be able to interact with that pretty quickly. I think one of the challenges that we've run into a few times, and it's not a big challenge, it's just a consequence of growth, is that part of Frontline strategy has been just to grow through acquisitions. And as you do that, you bring in a lot of new things into that ecosystem, into that environment. And we want to make all of that available. And so part of that is making sure, just like you said, making sure those APIs are there. And when they're not there, you do need a skill set that can basically go out and figure out what to do with that, how to pull that data together to create something that's then consumable by the skill. I do think that there are aspects of this that we're hoping to implement as well that take it a little bit beyond just data aggregation and the ideas of a profile that we would have to build out an infrastructure for, and notifications, things like that across multiple devices. But that's just icing. I think the core of it, AWS has done a really good job of making it simple to get into.
Yeah, I would agree with my fellow panelists. I would say, for myself, stepping back, Alexa or any of these voice technologies, they're interfaces, and they're only as smart as the systems behind it. So I think the key is to have a worthwhile system that is worthy of being leveraged through voice, and starting with that firm foundation. And then, as Melissa says, obviously you need the plumbing, you need the APIs to make it easy and actionable. But I think the real key is to figure out what, voice for voice's sake is a novelty and probably won't last. And I think the key is to figure out meaningful engagements that could be driven and enhanced through voice. And you've got to start with what your core is.
Yeah, and let's talk about that a little bit more. What kinds of data or information kind of makes sense to be delivered via the voice medium, right? So, Andrew, in your demo, Cerego, I think, we were able to hear how many students were on track, what the optimal learning hours are. Both for you, I think we got a snippet of, I think the attendance rate or the tardy rate of the day. How do you determine what kinds of information, makes most sense to be accessible via voice, technology for your customers, and which ones don't, right? There may be some data information that might be easier to do access via a web browser. So how do you kind of decide what makes sense for voice?
So for us, we have a partnership program. I think one of the other panelists, I think it was you, Melissa, have the same thing, and we do as well. We have a partnership program with our clients, and we're actually taking these questions to them. We want to partner very closely, and we do this with all of our products to try to understand, to make sure that we're providing functionality that districts actually want. And for us, Alexa is no different. We're going forward with a pilot program around Alexa, and partnering with these districts to help us understand, of the 200 recommendations that we gathered from our last conference, where we debuted our very basic skill set on this, which ones actually are valuable to you, and we're trying to aggregate that information into something you have to balance that with, well, which ones of these can we actually build very quickly or not. So that's our process. It's one that we're working through right now and gathering that feedback, and that's ultimately what's going to define the first iteration of this as we release it forward in a broader scale. And it becomes a lot easier once you have that core component to then continue to add new skills and new features to it as you go forward.
Yeah, can you give us a teaser about what we might be seeing in 2019?
So I think we've been looking at things like professional growth, how you might be able to make some of that available through a voice interface, notification systems like that. So as absences become, if you're a substitute teacher and there are various mechanisms within our system to get notified of that. We think voice would be a great one as well to notify substitute teachers that there's an availability there. From an administrative perspective, we have ideas around just better communication between your teachers and yourself, and again, extending that ability to ask what's going on. What are my fill rates? How do I compare to state averages and some of these types of things, baselining your solution so that you can very quickly make good decisions about what you want to do. So at a high level, those are some of the ideas that we're building and toying with. I think one of the cool features we realized we could do with this was to allow administrators or anybody using the skill to just give us feedback directly through the skill as well. So the thought is that they would you would basically invoke it, say Alexa, open Frontline Education, and give feedback, and it would record you telling us what you would like to see, and we could aggregate that on our end as well and begin pulling out metrics to decide what we like to do next as a result of it.
Great.
Yeah, I would say for us, we the core of Cerego is a deep understanding of learning and engagement that comes through students engaging with our applications, web and mobile. So the analytics that we provide for our instructors are more than just sort of the housekeeping around how many students and grades and where things are, but really deep insight into the content itself and the level of learning around that content. And what we did a couple of years ago was extend that to mobile. So we made a mobile insights application that was designed to allow an instructor walking into class 5 minutes before to get some important actionable data about how many of their students are on track or how many of their students are off track. What particular content is challenging for a certain cohort of users, so they could walk into a room, understand the lay of the land, and be able to say, hey, today I want to focus on mitosis because I know a lot of you are having trouble with this concept. It's kind of important for biology. So taking a cue from that, where we had the research behind what was actionable and valuable for instructors, it made sense to put that out first for voice, and then of course work with partners, get feedback on that, and build from there. But I think the important thing is it's really tempting to fire hose people with data and insights. And there are a lot of companies that can bedazzle people with their big data and everything they have. I think the important point is really actionable data and insights, and being able to narrow the focus on what are the couple things that are really going to make a difference right now. If I've got 3 minutes before I walk into a room, what can you tell me to help me do a better job for those learners in that room? And that's not about a ton of stuff. That's about just 1 or 2 points that can make a difference. And so that's where we try to zoom in. And it comes from having a deep understanding of those learners because they're playing with our applications constantly.
Melissa, do you have any thoughts about this question?
Yeah, sure. So for us, our focus continues to remain on the student engagement piece of the learning process. And while we absolutely want to support instructors, and we will continue to look at building those skills out and working with our customers to do that, much of our focus has been on that student engagement piece. And so we're working with a couple of institutions for later this year and into next year to do some hackathons, hack events that we would sponsor at their campuses to bring students together to develop the kinds of skills that they think would make their experience in school either more efficient, more effective, more engaging, whatever it might be. So that's some of the work and how we're going to be gathering our next phase of what we do. We also do a very similar process and within project management to understand what are our customers looking for, evaluating those ideas. The last thing I'll say is we also want to enable our partners. So a lot of the stuff that Andrew's talking about is getting me excited because I'm thinking about the data in Canvas that could also be leveraged to help make some of these recommendations or make some of these coaching moments for the instructors. So hopefully the way we've opened our API as well as our skills, that will enable some of our partners to do even cooler things outside of maybe the student-focused world, but into the instructor and broader analytics approaches that institutions and districts are taking.
Got it. We have a question from one of the audience. Bonnie's asking the panel. This question might be, maybe more directed to Andrew and Melissa, who work with universities. And she's asking, have you found that universities prefer being a, quote, design partner versus participating in a pilot program? Just wondering if there's a context for one versus the other. Are these terms that the two of you have encountered when working with universities to try out the voice-assisted technologies?
Not yet on our side, on the campus side, but I love the idea of a design partner versus a pilot participant or being part of a pilot program. Because if we're working together to craft this, that means that we immediately are addressing real-world use cases that university or institution is looking to fill. A lot of times, if we're just going to go make something, we have to make sure we're actually creating things to our broader constituents' use cases. We might not always hit the mark, but working very closely together with an institution, we know we can at least hit the mark there, get research and understanding of how well we're hitting that mark, and then help craft our next steps from there.
Great. I want to ask, kind of stepping outside of your immediate and direct work, I want to learn if any of the panelists, if you've seen other promising applications of voice technology in education outside of your what your company or what your team is doing specifically. Are there things tools that you've seen in the marketplace that you think really makes good use of voice technology in education?
Good question. Good.
Is that like a no?
The silence is good.
I think, yeah.
I haven't seen
something.
I mean,
I didn't mean that as a stumper question, but if you're stumped, that might be interesting to see why.
I think, to your point, Tonya, when you were talking about your 18-year-old, was it a
18-month-old talking
18-month-old,
yeah,
a little younger than 18-year-old. I have a 7-year-old, and just seeing my kid interact with Alexa just gives you a real sense for the future, and just the ease at which he's able to find the music he wants or gets the information he wants or occasionally add stuff to the shopping list that his parents don't want him to do. It just makes it so clear that it's a preferred medium. And you think about, all the people from kids to people who are challenged in terms of literacy, the prospects and potential of voice is enormous. That being said, I've seen a lot of applications come out specific for education that have been really impressive. I think some of the things around what you can do in terms of Wikipedia and getting access to things and things like NPR, there's more sort of general knowledge access apps are really interesting and have a lot of hope for the future. But in terms of like a true education company coming out with something very focused, I haven't seen anything yet, although I'm sure there's wonderful things out there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would agree. Honestly, I think just hearing from my fellow panelists has been really educational for me. It's really interesting to hear what they've been working on. Outside of that, I think I'm in agreement here. I haven't seen a whole lot in this space. I'm sure there's plenty, and I think after this I'll end up getting a bunch of emails or something. But I agree that I think what's really fascinating about this is that there is I think it makes sense that this is an interface that's going to take hold, and it's going to be, maybe it won't be everything. I think it's obvious as you begin to interact with Alexa, or really any of these, voice interfaces, what would make sense to do there and what wouldn't. One of the questions we tackled very early on around, what we're going to make available is how much of that information are we actually going to make available? And this is to your point, Andrew, what you were saying before is what's useful and what's just nuts, right? Like you wouldn't want to go through like a table in voice fashion. That wouldn't make a lot of sense, right? But I do think that there's, it's going to grow. It's the natural evolution of how we interact with technology. It's part of that whole process of moving from that, from a stationed area with your computer to a mobile device to now something that's just sort of around you that you can interact with, that becomes an interface to not just simple data, but also potentially predictive analysis and machine learning, and down the line maybe even AI. And ultimately, we're just replicating those scenes from Star Trek that everybody grew up with about 20 years ago. And I think that's what's interesting. It's going to seem cumbersome to some of us who are even on this call, and it's going to be completely natural for the people who are going to grow up with it. And it's important that we know that and that we design for that as we move forward into the future.
Yeah, I'll just share that I haven't seen anything either that's spectacular in the education industry, but I work with hundreds of partners, and I see great opportunities where if those partners and those point solutions could leverage voice, we could start to potentially see some of this really cool innovation. So I'll give you an example. I think about course evaluation tools that are now being leveraged as just-in-time feedback tools in a learning experience. So how am I not only getting an understanding of how my students are doing on the work I'm assigning them, but I want to understand their perception of how they're learning in my course at any given time. What a great place to implement some voice technologies. And there's some really cool tools that are doing stuff around that. It would be great if they added voice to their portfolio. Another example would be, I've seen some great, we've reinvented the group tool how many times in the last 20 years? But lately I've seen some really cool Slackish, chatish oriented group tools specific for education. That wouldn't it be great for a group member to be able to say, Alexa, are any of my group members online? And then be able to initiate an interaction with group members to solve a challenge in the moment as that student's thinking about that. Those are the kinds of things. I think there's opportunities, and they're embedded in some of the innovation we're already seeing. And I hope those technologies out there leverage voice as a way to bring that innovation into another realm that we're all talking about is going to get used more and more in education.
Yeah, I mean, on that note that it's going to get used more and more, and following up on your point, Bo, that voice is going to just be a natural evolution of as a medium through which we interact with technology and data. That's an assumption, right? I mean, that's sometimes we've seen that in education, sometimes the adoption of new technologies can sometimes take a little bit longer than it does in the consumer world.
Sure.
So I just want to throw a question out there. I mean, give me a number. Like, how many years or how long do you think it will be before voice technology as a medium will be mainstream in educational institutions? What's your bet? What would your bet be?
Under 5.
Under 5 years? Okay.
Yeah. I think you're right in that. I mean, education technology tends to be a little bit, behind the cutting edge. Although, I think that may be even changing as well. I think, at least in K-12, that's been our experience. And we're one of the things we're trying to do here is close that gap a little bit. And obviously, we're releasing some of these skills into the market. So we're helping push that envelope. That's a hard question to answer, though, because it is a bit of a bet. Yeah.
Well, you set the line at 5 years. So over or under, Andrew and Melissa, over or under 5?
I'm under in higher ed, but I think K-12 will be a little bit slower to move because of the privacy issues that can be implicit in some of this stuff. I think we're finding ways to solve it, and it's a solvable problem. It's just scarier in that space than it is in a higher education space where everybody's already using voice in their everyday lives, and that this just is a seamless experience for them.
Very good point.
I think that if you wait for institutions to drive demand and change, it's going to be a lot longer than 5 years to see voice take hold and at scale. I just don't think it's going to happen. I think there's some great forward-thinking institutions that'll do fantastic things and blaze a trail, but it was going to take a long time. I mean, just look at the rate of adoption now of it's going to take a long time. I think that what's going to happen, what's going to change is you're going to see a whole generation of people who are growing up talking to Siri and Alexa. And that is going to generate the demand on the system to change. And so I think that if that trend continues and if more and more applications get in the hands of younger and younger learners who grew up with that technology, that'll happen fast. But I think you're going to see a lot of institutions going that way, kicking and screaming. It's just a whole nother thing to mess around with and to manage, and it's a lot of unknowns, and that institutions don't love unknowns, and this is very, very unknown territory in terms of what are the implications and how do you manage it, and what happens if people start having these conversations. I mean, it's just it, especially as Melissa says in K-12. I mean, it's a huge issue, right?
Yeah. Bo, how do you think about the, some of the concerns over data privacy, especially in the K-12 setting?
I think
as it relates to
I think they're valid. Yeah, I think, as one of the constant question that gets asked, and you're absolutely right, K-12 is a slightly different animal in that it is a little bit scarier there. The number one question that always comes up is it safe? Is it secure? And I think there's a couple things that are important to know about that. I mean, for one thing, nothing that, at least for Frontline, nothing that we would release is something that wouldn't be behind some sort of authentication wall. And there are mechanisms that we can employ, and we plan to employ to make it even more secure through either a push notification to, validate that you are the person you say you are, but also there are advances already underway in terms of voice recognition to make sure that the person speaking is the person that is intended to be making that request or something to that effect. So on top of that, though, is the fact that you wouldn't just completely open up your entire ecosystem. At least you shouldn't, I don't think, until those things are in place, right? And there's a way to step forward with this, and I think there are things that we can make available to an administrator now through a voice interface that I think would be useful on a day-to-day basis. That doesn't represent the entirety of, at least like I said, from Frontline's perspective, doesn't necessarily represent the entirety of Frontline's ecosystem, but would be very useful, and it could very easily become just a part of our offering, just like, with our platform services, we offer mobile, and this would be another extension of that. That's one way we could do that, that I think would make it more mainstream and would help get people moving in that direction. Although the points, being brought up are certainly valid points. And in terms of security, I think a lot of that is just about what is your company doing in order to ensure that security. Frontline Education, for example, is a SOC 2 compliant company on its own, and of course AWS is as well. And these are the types of things that you need to pursue and to ensure that you can respond to threats, that you are taking into account situations that these educators and administrators are concerned about. It's a little different, I will admit this, when you're talking specifically about students. Thankfully, that's not something that we've had to answer very much of in terms of Frontline's approach to this, because we're more focused on the administrator right now, and the educator right now. So I would admit that in that setting, there's probably greater concerns, and I could see that being, the idea of an Alexa in the classroom listening to the students, I think would some parents might raise an eyebrow at that, and I think that's a valid concern to start. And but there again, there's ways to make that palatable, and I think there's a future there.
Right.
Could I add one point? So while I think that I'm cautious about adoption institutionally, I think that if we look outside the United States, we could see some really interesting adoption. And I think as you go into markets, and as Bo said, as these devices, you can get a dot for $30 and these prices go down as these devices and access to voice becomes ubiquitous and available at very low prices around the world, that the implications for having a bit of a personal tutor in a classroom in other parts of the country, other parts of the world where they do not necessarily have the scale and access and infrastructure for education is enormous. I've traveled around the world bringing my Alexa to places at Dubai, Rwanda, and they're just like, how quickly can we get that into a classroom? So I think you'll see some really fast adoption at institutions outside the United States, a lot quicker than we're going to see internally.
We've got a great question from one of our viewers, Nikita, who's asked a question that I think I'd like to come back to when it comes to technology and education, is that the promise of technology is supposed to make information, knowledge, data more accessible for people, for a more diverse range of people. And specifically what Nikita is asking is, how are you thinking about the idea of using voice interface as a solution to some of the digital accessibility issues in education, especially for people with, visual impairments or other kinds of challenges? How do you think about voice technology as a way to kind of help meet learners, with various special needs?
I can jump in quickly. I answered it also in the chat. For us with Canvas in particular, we're always looking to make sure that we're able to reach students in an accessible and equitable way. So having multiple opportunities or multiple options for getting the same kind of information out of Canvas becomes important to us. And as we developed these skills, we realized this helps us create yet another opportunity for that, particularly for students in this case. It hasn't driven our Alexa or our voice strategies specifically, but we are considering this as yet another medium or access point into Canvas as we do everything else that we build for Canvas. So it's sort of an underlying principle for us.
Yeah, I would agree. Accessibility is of paramount importance to us. We spend a lot of time on accessibility and usability, and I think voice is just another medium. And I go back to my point about literacy. I'm not sure the exact number, but it's rumored to be as high as 20% of the country reads at a 5% at a fifth grade level. That's pretty low, and the implications for training and retraining and education via voice are super interesting, and I think very important to take into account for the future.
Yeah, and I would also agree with my panelists here, fellow panelists. I think it's another interface, and so the same care that you take into making a website or web interface accessible, or the mobile app accessible. I mean, we're pursuing that same rigor with the voice technology as well. We have UX experts, and we're starting to, I think AWS has VX experts as well to help out with these types of questions as well. So it's the same concept. It's just a slightly different medium.
Mm-hmm. Great. Now we are nearing the end of our conversation, but I've got just a couple more questions. Kind of want to loop back to our audience here. Many of them are from companies and education organizations, and so I want to ask each of you, for education organizations that are just thinking about getting started with voice just now, they may be inspired by some of the stories that you shared. What suggestions or tips would you give them, kind of based on your own experience working with voice? What's a tip? How should they start? How should they start thinking about integrating voice? What are important questions they should consider and think about at the beginning?
I think from our perspective, yeah, I can take a swing. Let's see how this goes. Yeah, I think from our perspective, it was So when we tackled the voice question, again, as I mentioned, it was a bit of an inspiration internally that sort of led to a lot of user feedback. And I think that's sort of the biggest advice is AWS makes it pretty easy to put a foot in and test the water and try something. And I think a lot of times, especially with the larger companies, sometimes you end up asking the question over and over again, but is this the right thing to do? And often that's the right question to ask. I think when it comes to something like this, where it is so new, it's possible to build something rather quickly, identify a piece of your infrastructure, your applications, your system that would be compliant, has an API, can be interacted with relatively easily, and try something. And you can very quickly find yourself in a position to get feedback from that and begin to make reasonable decisions about where you want that attempt to then move forward to. So I think that's the biggest tip I would give is when you're thinking about doing it, pick one or two, for us, we just picked 3 utterances and we went with it. And I think it worked out really well. And I think that's a really easy and good way to put a foot in and see how things are going to go and take it from there.
I would say that the key for us is to think about lowering points of friction, right? So there's some things in education that you could do via voice that would increase friction. If you start doing multiple choice testing via voice, people will seizure. A, B, I mean, it'd be the nightmare scenario of all nightmare testing scenarios. You could just destroy young minds across the world. But if you think about where you lower the friction, where you give somebody just actionable insights. Hey, how's my class doing? Or what do I have any homework due? Or when's my next test? Or things where you could just make it super easy, transactional. I think that's really, really key. So lowering points of friction, not just doing voice for voice sake, but thinking, where is that magic moment where I just get access to the information in a really easy way that's going to drive benefit.
My last point of advice would be to hang out with users that you are serving that are using voice just in general. If you're not using it yourself, get exposed to how folks are using it in their everyday lives. So we had some folks spend some time in a couple of institutions and just understanding how students are using that from their own just productivity perspective. And that also created some light bulb moments. So in addition to all of the great advice that the panelists are saying, because yes, I 100% agree, I think looking for those moments of inspiration, going into your users' habitats to see those could be really helpful.
Okay, I think we might be in agreement that there are no multiple choice tests on voice.
No.
Okay. All right. Well, I want to thank all of our webinar panelists once again for lending their time and insights in this conversation. I want to thank all of our viewers and watchers from around the world for joining us for this session. So I want to say thank you to Melissa, to Andrew, to Bo for joining us today. I want to thank our sponsor, AWS, as well, for supporting and facilitating this conversation. If you're interested in checking out more of our webinars, you can go to edsearch.com/e/webinars. And again, this webinar has been recorded so that you can all watch it in the future if you need a refresher on all the great tips that we just shared. So yeah. So with that, I'm going to say goodbye to you all. So thank you again, Andrew, Bo, and Melissa. And yes, I hope that we can all stay in touch. And yeah, come check out edsearch.com for our next series of webinars and for all the things. We'll still be writing more about voice technologies in education in the future. So stay tuned.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.